September 25th, 2023 Board of Adjustment. Calling the meeting to order at this time. My name is Michael Carson, Chairperson of the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body made up of residents of the town of Prescott Valley who volunteer their time and efforts. We are impartial and are guided by state and local rules and regulations. We are somewhat informal. However, if anyone should show up, we ask that anybody addressing the board should use the microphone at the podium and state the name and address for the record. This evening's proceedings will be conducted using the following format. First, I will read the hearing item into the record. Following identification of the hearing item, staff will present the case and their recommendations to the board, after which questions from the Board of Adjustment will be directed to staff regarding the case. Next, the applicant will be invited to address the board, after which questions from the board for the applicant will be heard. After that, I will open the floor for general comments from the public regarding the case before the board. I ask that anyone speaking address their pertinent comments to the board through the chairperson and not to staff, the applicant, or individuals within the audience. I would also ask that comments be kept brief and to the point, as I may exercise the prerogative to confine public comment if necessary, should there be considerable public involvement in the case. There is one action item on the agenda this evening. I would like to note for the record town employees who are present: Ernest Ruby, Deputy Director for Development Services; Carmela David, Administrative Support; Stephen Drake, Deputy Town Attorney. Ms. David, please call the roll.
Chairperson Carson?
Here.
Vice Chairperson Kunish?
Here.
Member Willihan?
Here.
Member Schaefer?
Here.
Member Pattison?
Here.
If the board has reviewed the minutes from the August 28th, 2023 meeting, I ask if there are any corrections to the minutes. Hearing none, I will accept a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from August 28th, 2023.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Ms. Davis, may we have a roll call vote on the minutes?
Member Willihan?
Yes.
Member Schaefer?
Yes.
Member Pattison?
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Kunish?
Yes.
Chairperson Carson?
Yes. Are there any announcements from staff or board members? Hearing none, we will move on. Again, there's one action item on the agenda this evening, and that action item is as follows. Upon application of Gerald R. Woodruff, agent for Jeffrey A. Nelson, a request for a use permit per section 13-11-020 of the Town of Prescott Valley's ordinance to operate an office wherein only professional, administrative, clerical, or sales services are conducted per section 13-11-020.c.1.f. Subject property is located at 8483 East Spouse Drive, Unit 1, Prescott Valley, APN number 103-25-069. Mr. Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The subject property is located in an RS PAD, Residential Services and Services Planned Area Development Zoning District. This proposed use would allow one unit of a duplex to operate as a commercial insurance business. Under town code, it's allowed. You gave the section number earlier, and it is allowed in this district with a use permit. The applicant was to be here, but is not, so I'll just carry forward. Our town code does allow only professional, administrative, clerical, or sales services to operate in this district with a use permit. As with any other commercial business in town, Unit 1 of this property will be used as a commercial insurance agency, and we'll have to meet all building and zoning requirements. The property owner does not occupy the adjacent unit. It's occupied by a tenant, and this has caused a little bit of concern for staff. It should be noted, this request is unique. The town has never had such a request within a duplex development. And although allowed with permit, applicant must be in substantial conformance with stipulations due to the character of the duplex housing development. At this time, as I mentioned to you, staff's biggest concern is the next door neighbor, who is still a residential, is in that residential unit. So staff has concerns about parking. We want to make sure the parking requirements are met. And at this point, the size of that building would require 3 parking spaces and 1 handicap space. The handicap space, if you will look at your site plan, is within the garage area. So that's being designated as an exclusive handicap spot. Little bit of concern with that if someone parks behind that vehicle when a handicapped person is in that spot. So that still needs to be ironed out. We still need to hear from the applicant about that. One of the other things, because this is somewhat unusual, a unique development for this area, staff is asking for a 2-year approval on the project.
What's
2-year approval, subject to a review within 2 years. And staff is also asking that if there are any complaints about the project, that we be immediately notified and we'll bring it back to the board for your review. If there are complaints, for example, from the neighbor or from people in the neighborhood because of parking issues, things of that nature. And we would ask that you would condition it with an immediate review upon complaints being received by staff. Staff is recommending approval. As I mentioned, we have some trepidation because of the use, because of the parking, and because of the neighbor next door who is actually renting that duplex. So we are ready to make a recommendation of approval and would ask that you list the conditions as identified, both in writing and also verbally by staff just now.
Has the neighbor complained and said anything about this?
I'm sorry, sir?
Neighbor, has he made any?
We have not heard from the neighbor. The applicant tells us that he has contacted the neighbor and he had no problems at this point. But that's prior to any parking issues, anything that would need to be addressed if there was a complaint. So at this point, no, sir, we don't have any.
Now, that would concern me. That neighbor may not be there 6 months from now, be a different neighbor.
And my concern, I'm sorry.
Come back to us again and go the whole thing all over again.
Right. My concern as staff is the differentiation of the parking status. It's a 2-duplex driveway. So what I would ask the applicant is to stripe that down the middle with a yellow stripe, if you will, and no parking allowed beyond that. I'm also asking that the applicant provide 1 more parking space adjacent to the driveway in the front. That would give them 3 parking spaces, 1 for the applicant or the employee and 2 for customers, and the 1 handicap
Where would
parking.
we put that? I don't
It
see
would go over to the east. There's an area just to the east of I guess it's,
vacant lot?
well, no, adjacent to the driveway.
There's a gravel parking
There's a
area,
gravel
landscaped
parking
area in that.
And we would ask that the applicant provide that as additional parking and/or have a reciprocal parking with anybody else in the area if it comes to that. But right now, we think with the additional parking space to the side of the existing 2-car driveway, it should be sufficient unless we receive complaints.
Another question. Has there been discussion about signage? Is he going to put State Farm signs on the side?
We have discussed signage, and because it's being looked at as a commercial application, we'll have to meet all the intent of our sign code. So that means we'll have to evaluate when they come in with a sign permit. They won't be allowed to do anything other than 1 small wall-mounted sign. They won't have a big monument sign out in front. That would be a concern.
Mr. Nelson only owns one of the buildings?
I'm sorry, sir?
Mr. Nelson only owns one of the buildings?
He only owns, well, I believe he owns both sides of it, but he's keeping his tenant on the one side.
Does that handicap space in the garage comply with ADA?
If the travel path is a sufficient slope, then yes, it could qualify. We haven't seen the details of that, and we won't see them until they submit a drawing of their plans. But we'll have to make sure that that line of pathway of leading up to the house is within the slope requirements of ADA.
But we won't know that until we've approved it.
Yes, sir. Accordingly, we haven't received the detailed plans. So the devil's in the details, of course, and we'll be waiting for the details on this. If it does not comply, again, like I said, to the commercial standards of the town for both accessibility parking, for signage, or for any other reason, we have the ability at the staff level to make them comply or to deny at that point.
We're opening a can of worms in this one.
60 feet isn't quite enough to even turn a car around there by the time we get a couple of cars parked in there. They'll be over in the neighbor's driveway.
We're concerned about the parking situation, but as I mentioned, it's a new one on us, it's unique. We have the word of the applicant and the farmer's insurance agent who's gonna occupy the building, that it will be done to town code. So we have to give them the first one. Fool me once, you know.
Control customers coming in and out.
So any other questions, I'd be glad to answer.
That area of Spouse, my experience has been that that's a pretty heavily traveled road. Would you characterize it that way?
It's a real mixed use in there, a lot of residential, some commercial. So it is a heavy traveled area, and the backing out onto the street will be a problem.
And that's
something we'll have to address.
That is one of the concerns that I had too, and I think it's been mentioned already, that backing out of that driveway, it doesn't appear that it's possible to back out, turn around, and then pull forward onto Spouse, as it is with the other commercial buildings in that area that have larger driveways.
You are absolutely correct, Commissioner Kunish. That was one of our concerns, if you will. But again, like I said, it's a new proposal, and the reason we're asking you to review it within a year is so we can, if there are issues, we can resolve them. And I would also ask you, as a board, that if we have any complaints, concerns, that it be immediate review by the board at that time to see what can be done to straighten out an issue if it's brought up.
Mr. Ruby, I do have a question on the disability parking.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
I do have a question on the disability parking.
Yes.
Since it's going to be inside the garage, my concern is now we're coming into weather with the snow possibilities, and of course, rain. One concern is the garage door going to be open at all times during business? So if it's snowing and raining, is that going to come in? Because now it becomes slippery inside the garage. Number two, if somebody is coming with a van and they have a wheelchair, I'm not certain that that is wide enough.
The area of that garage is a little over 300 square feet. So I believe it's, the depth is 20 feet and the width of it looks to be 14.6. We require 11 foot with a 5 foot accessibility aisle for a van. So it is a little bit short. Yes, ma'am. Good point.
You guys got 60 foot drawn up as an overall lot size, but you also have 60 foot in the driveway.
I think that 60 foot is at the top and at the bottom are
30.
the same property line
That'd
dimensions.
be a wide driveway. But I think it's just the dimensions of the lot, 60 by 100.
I have a real concern about, well, the project, but in particular the disabled access parking. It in no way matches any of the formats prescribed in the ADA at the federal level. And this is obviously a federal direction for compliance.
Mr. Callahan, or Wilhan, I'm sorry.
I have a question. This is the first time they've used a duplex for a business, right?
That's
Going
correct.
up and down that street, there's, all the commercial buildings look like commercial buildings. Are we setting a precedent saying, because there's a lot of duplexes being built on that street,
Right.
are we setting a precedent that says, hey, Bring your dog grooming shop in there, bring your whatever, you know, your sewing machine shop, you know?
That was one of the concerns that staff had, Commissioner Willan. Again, I would throw out to the board, you have options. You can approve with conditions if you see any conditions that you'd like to impose on the project, or you can deny at this time. When the applicant came in, we explained to him the issues of moving forward with this request. Some of, again, the parking, the handicap accessibility, backing out onto Spouse. And we told him that if we couldn't tell him, no, you cannot apply. So we took the application with those provisos, as I said, and told him we would present it to the board. And I was hoping he'd be here tonight to explain his, you know, his situation, but he's not here, so I give it back to the board.
Well, I just have one concern also. He's got one neighbor right now, empty lots on the other side. Get more neighbors over there, then these neighbors complain, then we have to do the whole thing over again. I just think we're opening up a big can of worms on this thing. I really do.
I realize it's a mixed-use area, but this is a residential building.
That is correct.
So I do have a question then. In regards to screening for protection of adjacent properties, the adjacent property is right next door.
Right.
So right next door is, that person, is the property, is the actual residence of someone right next to a business. Now, I realize it was zoned to allow for this, but if we were to screen for that, if we're talking about a 6-foot wall, isn't that destroying the property of the person renting next door?
Well, again, thank you for the question, Board Member Schaefer. That's one of the questions we had as we looked at it, and the reason we conditioned it as a commercial project. And our feeling was if the screening was required, it would go onto the adjacent parcel to block that view. Because it's part of a duplex, we really couldn't ask them to build a 6-foot fence in the driveway to separate those uses or going into the backyard. So again, that was one of our concerns, that we are opening up a can of worms, if you will, and this may lead to other types of requests similar to this in nature. So again, I would give it back to the board and allow you to use your discretion as to whether to approve with conditions, or even deny. I was hoping the applicant would be here tonight so he could explain his position, and he was very clear about his position and what he was going to do as an insurance agent in that office and not have that much clientele parking there, but obviously he's not here.
By chance, did he happen to state what kind of insurance?
I believe Farmers Insurance Agency.
Okay. And just any, it can be housing insurance, it can be car insurance?
I believe it's residential, some commercial type business, but
As far as the parking is concerned, returning to that for just a moment, you had described the handicapped or the disabled parking would be in the garage. Would there be another space at the front of the garage? So before the garage door, would there be another parking spot in order to meet the parking requirements?
this is one of the problems that staff had with their request, is if there is a handicap van, for example, in the garage utilizing the ADA compliant space, that if someone parked behind them, they'd be at a disadvantage waiting for that person to finish their business. So again, there are concerns. Any other questions I can answer at this time?
They're going to extend their, mention maybe bringing parking out to the side of the duplex there, but that only leaves you, if you're a 60-foot overall lot and they're sitting there at 22 foot right now in the building, you only got, but that's 30 foot, you only got like around 8 feet left to extend their parking out to the lot lines. That's not much.
The driveway looks to be wide enough to accommodate 2+ cars. Pushing that out to the left of the existing driveway could conceivably have another parking space. But again, the devil's in the details, and we're waiting for them to submit some engineered plans so we can take a look at those at the building permit stage to see if it's going to be doable or not.
Would you make them pour it, concrete, or would it be?
Correct. It has to be, parking surface has to be a hard surface.
There's no sidewalks there, is there?
No.
There are no sidewalks on Spouse.
Everything's compacted in there, and I mean,
It's a tight squeeze, yes, sir.
then when you get customers coming in, they're not gonna follow the rules.
Well, and that was our concern, that they're going to park on the other side wherever there's a vacant place to park. They're going to park in the space for the other duplex. And that's why there has to be some sort of demarcation line down the driveway. And obviously, people don't follow signage all the time, so that was what we were waiting for as our first complaint, so we could bring it back to the board and let you evaluate it again.
Neighbor in here who's not as cooperative, you might have a real problem.
If the neighbor changes, there may be a different attitude, exactly.
Totally.
And what if, when the insurance company wants out of there and they wanna turn it back over to a condo? I mean,
And that's why we're asking for a shorter duration. Typically, a use permit is for 2 years, as granted by the board. We're asking for a 1-year review, so if there are any issues, we can comply with it early on. And we're also asking that you impose a condition with any complaints received that we would immediately bring it back to the board for evaluation. So that may be in a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now. Once we receive that complaint, if we receive a complaint, we would bring it back, reschedule it for the board to evaluate.
I personally think they're trying to do too much with this property, forcing a solution that's not going to be acceptable to anybody. It's going to cause problems down the line.
setting a precedence.
And in looking at the town code, in considering use permits, we're to look at 1321-110D, which says that granting of a use permit is a matter of grace, not of right. This has come up before. The burden of proof is on the applicant to show that this is not detrimental to persons residing or working in the vicinity, to adjacent property, to the neighborhood, or to the public welfare in general, and that it will fall in conformity with any conditions, requirements, or standards prescribed under this chapter, under Chapter 13. I think here there are some serious concerns about this project with the impact it would have on the adjacent property, shared driveway, the parking concerns, the signage concerns. I think raise too many concerns about this property being used in this fashion.
Any
Did the
other? Go ahead.
applicant state a reason why he was not going to be here?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Did the applicant give a reason why he wasn't going to be here, or is he not required to be here?
When I spoke to him last week, he was to be here, but I don't know what the situation is. So obviously, he's not here to defend his request. And staff is presenting it, just the facts. So there are some issues, there are some controversies. And so, again, we'll put it at the board's discretion to approve with conditions, or deny.
Kind of an indication of the seriousness of this project for him. Not here to defend it. Problem 2 months from now, how serious is he going to be about resolving that one? You know,
Any further comments? Hearing none, I will accept a motion.
I move to deny use permit UP 23-008.
I second it.
Ms. Davis, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Member Willoughby?
yes,
Member Schaefer?
Yes.
Member Pattison?
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Kunish?
Yes.
Chairperson Carson?
Yes. The application is denied. Since we don't have anyone in the audience to offer any other comments, we'll bypass that. Anything further from the board? Any comments? There being no further business, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor by aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed by no?